24 hours later, and the hallway still smells like burnt flesh and melted plastic. My eyes nearly water as the stench threatens my mortality in ways I was never prepared to face. I'm 32 years old, and all I can think about is what I'd look like after 1,000 volts of electricity cook me from the inside out.
Where did they put him?
Rob's voice fades into my ears, shaking me from my thoughts.
What?
I ask, as I register what he'd said a little too late.
The engineer. Where did they put his body?
The question is enunciated with the handheld saw digging into the rusted railing, shooting up sparks. For the third time, I shuffle my foot to the right until the rubber sole of my boot bumps against the faded red of the fire extinguisher.
Why do you want to know?
The engineer, this little ordinary seaman called Ahmed. There are only 27 people on this ship, and we've been out to sea for a little over a fortnight, and he still doesn't know Ahmed's name. 26 people, I mentally correct. Rob shrugs, wiping his running nose on his sleeve, then pushes the saw harder into the metal until it pops loose. The other side of the rail holds fast, and he shuffles himself along the slip-resistant floor to cut it loose as well.
Because I've never been on a ship before where someone's died.
Truthfully, neither have I. But I'd seen death before when I'd worked on the offshore oil rig. I shuffle as well, remaining on my feet as I shadow him, standing guard on fire watch.
The freezer,
I finally answer, knowing he'll regret asking, and knowing that thought will lodge itself into my brain. All I'll taste for the next 12 days is what I'm smelling now. I imagine the crispy crunch of charred human flesh between my teeth and swallow the sudden excess of saliva that floods my mouth with the burst of nausea.
Oh, they have a freezer for dead bodies?
Sure, they keep them right next to the hamburger meat. I hate that being the first thought out of my mouth, but I was never very good at tempering what I say. Why start now? The saw slips, and he narrowly misses cutting into the leg of his pants before releasing the safety trigger as he looks up at me with wide blue eyes.
Tell me you're fucking with me.
His face loses most of its color, and I shrug a shoulder.
Alex, please tell me that's a joke.
It's Alejandro, and I can't, because I'm not. And even if it were, I'd never take it back after him calling me Alex, like I've not been all but glued to his ass and sharing his shifts to make sure he doesn't screw something up. Able-bodied seamen were the babysitters of the lowest on the totem pole, after all.
So they just wrap them up in plastic and drop them into our food storage?
Was the concept so difficult for him to believe? It wasn't like we had room for a morgue among the 1,500 cargo containers we hauled.
What would you prefer? Decomp on deck?
My mind wanders to what that'd be like. It isn't like there's flies to deposit maggots to help nature's process along. Would it take longer? My skin crawls, and I suppress a shudder.
A burial at sea. It's honorable.
Maybe back in ye old pirate days, or on naval ships during wartime.
You want him to be shark food? And you tell his family what? It's better than him being in our food. And I don't know, man.
Slowly, he turns back to his assigned task, starting up the handsaw again.
Tell them he was lost at sea.
Sure. Offer them the tiniest shred of hope that Ahmed could survive in the middle of the Atlantic, then never giving them closure? The muscle in my cheek twitches as I clench my teeth together, and I press my back harder against the metal beam I'm leaning against. The hull groans with the growing swells outside, and loose metal clanks in the distance, echoing down the hall. Our captain hasn't made the announcement yet, but I'm sure our trajectory will be forced to change with the low-pressure system building just below the southern tip of Africa. Already, whitecaps are forming on the swells in the distance, and we're banned from deck duty for the evening until things calm. We'd be on this monstrosity for at least an extra 5 days.
Besides, I didn't know he has family.
Rob's admission pulls my gaze to the back of his dirty blonde head, and for once in my life, I truly believe that if I threw a scratch and sniff sticker into the bottom of the ocean, a blonde would drown himself trying to smell it. All Ahmed ever did would show off pictures of his twin girls and the wife who'd divorced him 2 years prior. He still supported all three because he didn't believe in abandoning family due to irreconcilable differences. A mental image of his smile flashes into my mind, the smile of his children, and then their lips peel back, burning away as their teeth crack from the pressure of their clenching jaws. I blink away the thought firmly, rubbing my hand down my face. Too long at sea, too long with these dumb bastards, some of which I was fond of, and not enough sunlight for the past week was screwing with me. It had screwed with Ahmed, hadn't it? That was our only explanation for why the lead engineer would make such a fatal mistake.
Do you think he did it on purpose?
Rob asks as I lean down, picking up the fire extinguisher and turn my eyes from the direct light of the new rail he begins to weld. The flash lights the tight hallway eerily, dancing my shadow against the wall like a puppet on strings. Here's hoping he couldn't read minds. I shrug again, though he can't see me beyond the darkness of the welding goggles.
I think it was a tragic mistake.
I try to remember what he was like at breakfast, but my mind had been on our upcoming port, the odd craving I sometimes had for standing on solid ground. Humans aren't meant for the water.
There, I think I've got it.
Rob stands, and even his young knees snap, crackle, and pop as he stretches to his full, lanky height. I look over his welding job and lament the fact that he's pretty decent with a torch and appreciate that nothing caught fire.
Yeah, kid, you've got it.
I nod to the next rail over, the rust eating through enough that if someone ran their hand across it in a rush, they could potentially deglove themselves.
1 down, 20 to go on this haul.
He groans, tipping his head back, and I grin.
Just wait until we get the all clear to be on deck, and you can do it with an ocean view. Yippee,
he says sarcastically, and moves down the line to the next piece of metal. I tuck my hands into the pockets of my coveralls and settle back against the next beam. A breeze gusting through the hallway as someone opens a bulkhead door. The scent of salt water is refreshing, and I take in a deep breath. As it dissipates, I see Rob's hands, still for a moment when the remnants of Ahmed's last moments return, thicker, coating the inside of my nostrils.
Weather's supposed to clear soon?
He asks, his voice a bit tighter.
Yeah, Rob. We'll get out of here soon.
I tap my foot against the fire extinguisher again and look down the long hallway, watching as it seems to warp slightly with the pitch of the ship on the waves. Ahmed's final words to me come whispering back as he stood, gathering his uneaten plate of food.
Can you hear it?
He asked through a wince of pain.
She's calling.
The hull gives another groaning rumble, and I hunch my shoulders against the familiar sound.
Yeah, I can hear it.
The wind, the incoming storm, the deep is calling, and I'm depending on this rusted monstrosity not to answer. I went to bed expecting to be thrown from my bunk, and instead, I startle awake to deafening silence and stillness. I feel like I just missed something, and it left the pressure of noise behind in my ears that was no longer making a sound. I don't move, hearing straining until my stomach drops in recognition, and I sit up. The engines aren't running. The emergency horn blasts through the silence, and I trip over my feet as I leap out of bed, shin smacking into the small seat beside it. I don't even take the time to snarl out a curse from the pain as the horn's low, singular tone continues, and I scramble to pull my coveralls on over my boxers as I push my hard hat firmly to my head.
Alejandro!
Rob's voice is full of panic through my closed door, and I yank it open, raking my eyes over him in a quick assessment.
Hard hat!
I snap, bouncing on one foot, lacing my boots, and he shoots back down the hallway to his bunk. Being stuck with a greenhorn on welding day was one thing. In an emergency situation was something else altogether. Leaning back into my room, I grab my radio and a flashlight, shoving the latter into my pocket.
Bowling, what's going on?
Not even static comes back, and I check the channel, clicking through them.
Bosun Bowling, come in.
The light on the radio flickers, and I raise my eyes to the hall light as it also starts flickering. Rob is running back, his overly large boots smacking against the flooring, his face ashen.
My radio isn't working. That's the fire alarm.
I nod, tucking the radio into my back pocket, and close my door, a lump lodging in my throat. The lights are shorting. Is it in electrical? The engine room? Why isn't anyone communicating? I'm cut off by my radio squealing in my pocket, the feedback running into the ship's call system that amplifies the noise, and I smack my hands against my ears.
The hell? Go to muster station!
I yell at Rob over the din in turn, jogging down the hall as the ship's horn silences, then lets out several short blasts, then another long. I try to count them as I pull open the sliding door to the stairs outside and stop dead. We're in a fog bank, and once I'm outside, I can hear another able-bodied seaman hitting a gong on port side and a bell ringing starboard.
Alejandro!
Bolin barks from the railing above me, and I look up.
Get to the bridge!
I nod, turning, and run straight into Rob, who's staring at the front of the ship.
Is that smoke?
No. What did I tell you to do? I don't have time to babysit, but I toss my elbow into him to pull his attention and jog to the outer stairs, running up to the bridge. I can hear his shoes smacking on the metal behind me. The chief and second mate huddle together over nav, and our captain is nowhere to be seen.
What's happening?
I call above the sound of the horn blasting again and the emergency beeping from our navigation system, and Bolin shakes his head.
Alejandro!
Chief turns to me, his face almost as ashen as Rob's.
There's no fire. It's an electrical problem. We hit fog 2 hours ago, and nav went offline. When it came back up, it said we were off course.
How far? I ask, looking between him and Bolin.
It says...
He hesitates.
It says we're in the southern Atlantic. Obviously.
I snort, stepping forward.
We were going a little further south to avoid the low pressure system, weren't we?
Why in the hell were they acting so weird? I look down at nav, and my throat goes dry.
It's screwed up. That's not even physically possible.
We were halfway to Antarctica, according to our navigation system.
Right?
Bolin laughs, but there's tension in the corners of his eyes.
That's a non-issue, but electrical, it's screwed. Okay, did you get Ahmed up?
I ask before I can stop myself. And all I hear for a moment is the shrill beeping in the horn before I can recover.
Where's Captain? I don't know.
Chief stands straighter, leaning his hands against the console.
He's not in his quarters. No one's seen him.
My stomach does a quick pinch with my growing nervousness.
The rest of the crew? Deck is spread out on watch. Engine and electrical are trying to figure out the issue. And we have stewards depot looking for the captain. They may have already found him, but radios are out and... Thank God.
He cuts himself off as the horn silences and the squealing over the comms dies.
We don't know who's unaccounted for. Maybe he's overboard.
Rob pipes up from behind me, and I close my eyes momentarily, shaking my head as no one responds.
What do you need me to do?
I look at Bolin, who looks at Chief.
Helm, the engines aren't on.
I do as I'm told, looking out of the wall of windows and seeing nothing but a thick gray blanket.
Are we drifting? 12 knots still. Why can't we feel the ship moving?
Rob asks.
The water is glassed. It should slow us down, but not as fast as waves.
Bolin supplies, and I look down at the lights flicking along the console.
Did we send out any communications before things started going haywire?
I ask the question I don't really want to know the answer to, and Bolin shakes his head almost imperceptibly. So, we were off course with no outbound communications and no engine. It wasn't ideal, but I'm not panicking yet. We're a cargo ship, oversupplied by a month for a run that would only take us a month. We aren't taking on water, we're not in the middle of a storm, there's no pirate activity in the South Atlantic, and fog banks clear. Above us somewhere, the moon has to be shining, because despite not being able to see shit beyond the mist, it's lit up, allowing me to see the colors of the containers on deck and the reflective stripes and the two ABs on either side of the bow.
What can I do?
Rob asks, and before my commanding officer can answer, I point to a seat.
You couldn't manage to detach yourself from my hip to go to muster station like I ordered. You can sit your ass there and not cause trouble.
I glance at Bolin, who gives me a faint smile. 5 years ago, I was that greenhorn, and he was giving me the business. I glance at Rob as he sits, folding his hands nervously and placing them between his knees as he rests his elbows on his thighs. No, I wasn't ever that green, I decide. The rig worked most of that nervous energy out of me before I jumped careers for a lesser paycheck and an increased rate of death, apparently. But at least I felt like I was going somewhere.
Shit!
Chief snaps behind me as the faint hum of the power shutting down fills our ears, forcing the bridge into darkness. It takes a moment for my eyes to adjust, and when they do, everything starts back up again, making spots dance in my vision.
Hey, they got it!
Rob cheers as the sound of the engine starting back up rumbles the bridge, bringing back the familiar and comforting sound.
They did!
Chief says, slapping his hand against his second mate's shoulder.
See if you can get Nav to refresh. I'll get on comms.
My fingers tingle as the wheel vibrates under them, and a strange reverberating sound makes the hull groan under my feet.
Did you feel that?
Bolin asks a moment before pitching forward unsteadily, then throws up on the floor. My stomach rolls and I look forward, trying to ignore the retching sounds.
Bosun, get it together. I've not been seasick in 3 years, and I can't have my record tarnished by sympathetic puking.
I joke, taking on the palpable relief filling the bridge.
Sorry. Jesus. Sorry. That was unexpected.
He holds up his hand placatingly, pressing his other to his knee to steady himself.
OS,
he says to Rob, who stands straight in my periphery, probably thankful he's no longer in timeout.
Go and get some powder and a mop. Got it.
Instead of turning to the small cleaning closet behind him, he turns and clatters his way back down the stairs, and Bolin laughs, shaking his head.
He's never going to make it.
I snort, glancing down at the Doppler shift, looking for our relative speed. We were only set at 5 knots, but it still said we were traveling around 10.
Hey, Chief, do you want me to back her down? What?
He shifts, holding the phone to his ear, then nods.
Yeah, comms are still down. Can't even turn on the horn. Just pull her all the way back. Let's take it to a slow drift so we can check on repairs. Got it. Want me to run down?
Bolin pats his stomach like he's battling back another round of nausea.
No. Switch places with Sammy. Nav's resetting, and I don't want you hurling all the way down to electrical.
Chief places the phone down, stepping around the console as the second mate moves off the bridge.
Did you throttle back, Alejandro? Yeah.
I glance down to make sure, but the sound of the engines hasn't changed, and the speed hasn't lessened. I trail off as I spot a dark shadow in the gray.
What is that?
I point, and his gaze follows my finger. He remains silent as it slowly grows more prominent in the distance, beginning to take shape, and something cold races down my spine. It's large and strangely ominous as it begins to break through the fog like a specter. He squints, stepping around the helm as if getting a few feet closer is going to make a difference.
It looks like a naval vessel.
Exhaling sharply, he reaches back, grabbing my shoulder, giving me an excited little shake.
It is! An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer! US, boys!
The superstructure takes shape, and my mouth dries, but I still can't figure out why.
Are we in restricted waters? Can't be. There's no restricted waters on Nav, even as far out as it says we were.
My gut twists as I watch it grow closer and realize it wasn't moving. Only we were.
Shouldn't it be communicating with us?
I glance at Chief, whose brows furrow.
Yeah, but our comms are down. If we get too close, they'll start yelling on the PA system.
He moves away from me to the signal flag box.
I'll put up a distress flag. Maybe they'll send someone out. At least help us figure out where the hell we are.
I nod mutely, my palms growing sweaty, and I struggle to keep my eyes from moving back to the looming shadow where I can see the 5-inch gun coming into focus and the Phalanx Sea Whiz. I, like too many Americans, have seen viral videos of in action. I'm sure it was intimidating during the day, but in the dark, it was terrifying. But that still isn't what's triggering my increasing dread as we move closer. I swear I see the missile hatches on the forward deck. Then I realize the issue. There's no lights on that ship. There isn't a single goddamn flicker of light anywhere on it.
Chief!
I begin, and my sternum slams into the wheel, knocking my breath from my lungs as the ship drags to a violent stop. I watch the stacks shift, as if in slow motion, the cargo containers straining against their twist locks and lashings, and I see the reflective stripes on the AB's coveralls vanish as they're thrown out of view. I reach for the man overboard alarm on instinct, but it doesn't work. My eyes watering as I drag in ragged, coughing breaths, choking on my air. The sounds of metal cables snapping, bolts pinging as they shoot into the sides of other containers, break through my heart pounding in my ears. The stacks tip like dominoes, throwing dozens of containers over the front of the ship, and only a small spray of water splashes up as they pile against the side of the ship and a mound that backs up onto the deck. A high-pitched squeal reverberates through the hull, the grinding of metal following as we're plunged back into complete darkness, leaving me deaf and half blind. I try to orient myself. I try to speak, but my voice comes out non-existent, and I cling to the wheel through another round of violent coughs. Then I notice the spiderweb cracking along the front window, crimson lines filling the grooves through the tears in my eyes. Chief's body hangs at the epicenter of the broken glass by his neck at a 90-degree angle, his head obscured through the other side of the window. His limbs twitch as my brain struggles to process what in the hell just happened as I push numbly away from the wheel. Seconds pass, minutes, and when I blink, Rob is standing in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. His hard hat is missing, but he's unhurt as he shakes me gently.
Alejandro!
His voice is far away, and I blink again and again, like that will clear the bizarre dream state I'm stuck in.
Alejandro, we have to go!
Go? I reach up, grabbing his forearm so he'll stop shaking me.
Bosun has everyone we can find. We're going to the ship.
I look over his shoulder at Chief hanging from the window, and then I look back up at the kid and nod, letting him lead me off the bridge and down the stairs. It hurts to breathe, but each time my chest aches, it makes everything around me come in a little clearer. The ship is silent again. The ringing, the gong has stopped, and our footsteps seem too loud on the deck as the fallen containers loom above us, their metal groaning in subtle warning of their instability. I reach up to pull off my hard hat and stick it on Rob's head, and he pushes my arm back down.
Already saved my melon. Cracked right in half when I slammed into the wall.
He reaches up, rubbing the back of his neck, and I instantly think of Chief.
Good.
I croak, rubbing my throat then clear it.
Good.
I search for mental stability as we walk to Bolin, his right arm in a sling, his eyes watering with pain. Around him are 5 guys. 5 out of 26. 7, adding in Rob and me, and I swallow back my nausea. It's easier to push down when I spot the captain as one of the 5, and I lean into that burn in my gut.
Where the fuck were you, Captain?
I accuse, and he turns to look at me, his movements stiff. Blood is crusted down the sides of his neck, coming from his ears, and his nostrils are also red-rimmed. His eyes are unfocused, pupils wide, and I look to Bolin, stopping in my tracks.
Found him wandering a hallway. I don't know if this happened before or after, but he's...
Bolin clears his throat.
I'm the highest-ranking deck staff we have, so I'll be calling the shots.
He looked queasy saying that, blinking one eye in a wince. I walk forward, trying to ignore the looming destroyer close enough now that I could shout to them if the crew were on the deck. And then it strikes me. We hit something head on. Why aren't we sinking? Why aren't we at least taking on water? I start to lean over the side, and Bolin's hand presses against my chest, making me flinch back. I probably have a wheel-shaped bruised tattoo across my torso.
We didn't hit anything. Not technically. It's...
He struggles to explain, and I push his hand away, leaning to look for myself anyway. The ocean is close, or it would be if I could see the ocean. Instead, it's a sea of crimson-colored kelp, barely moving in the placid water. It stretches beyond our ship, behind it, in every direction until it disappears into the fog like a bloodied nest, trapping us and the destroyer.
Pretty sure it tangled in the blades, got wrapped up in the shaft, and that's what yanked us to a stop.
That was impossible. There was no way kelp, of all things, would be thick enough to... My thoughts stall as I look at the containers that had fallen off the ship. Tons of weight piled, barely sinking in the kelp bed.
It's like an island?
I ask Bolin like he's the resident expert, and he shrugs his injured shoulder.
I guess. But the lifeboats won't move on it, and it can't be more than 70 meters to that military ship. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer,
I say, feeling the phantom pressure of Chief's excited grip on my shoulder. The ship below my feet vibrates then, and the hull echoes the sound, low and warbling in such a way that dizziness rocks me back on my heels. Bolin throws up weakly over the side of the ship, and like he is dizzy as well, our captain sits down on the side, rocking a bit.
Are you okay?
Rob's hand on my arm steadies me, and I swallow the nauseous lump in my throat once more. I lock eyes with Bolin as he stands straight, a thin trail of blood running from his nose.
We've got boards. I want us to form a chain, laying them from the ship's edge to the destroyer. We're going to walk across it,
Bolin says, wiping his sleeve under his nose. I trail my eyes from the captain to Bolin. Were they sick?
Wait, what?
Rob's voice goes tight.
You want us to walk across the ocean?
I look over the side again, my eyes adjusting more to the dark, and notice that it isn't just a sea of red. Black pockets, almost perfectly round and 5 feet in diameter, have somehow been made in the bed.
If you don't want to go, you can stay on the ship, but I'm going. We have no power, no comms, and over half of our crew is either dead, injured, or missing. That's a United States naval ship. If anything's going to have comms, it's going to be that. But it doesn't have power.
I trail off as I finally allow myself to look at the darkened ship and see a glow of red illuminating the deck. Did I miss them before? Was it too foggy to see them? Or were the lights too dim?
I'm not saying I don't want to go, but how do you know that shit will hold us up?
Rob asks, tucking his hands into his pockets, and I notice they're shaking as he slips them away.
I don't, but we're less than a football field away, and as acting captain, I'm going to risk it. If it's strong enough to fuck up our girl and hold up those containers,
he gestures to the pile,
then I think the odds are in our favor.
I look back to the eerily still water, then shake my head, stepping up.
As acting captain, you need to stay here. I'll go. Besides, the ocean's quiet for now, but if waves kick up, you can't balance with just one arm.
It's a weak excuse in my head, but I want to give him an out. He isn't like me. He's almost a decade older with a family that relies on him. It's selfish in a way. I hated the idea that Ahmed's family would be suffering without him. And I didn't think I'd be able to survive the guilt if Bolin went down too, as I stood by with my thumb up my ass.
I'll go too.
Rob dug the steel toe of his boot in against the deck.
But we could wait until morning? No, the weather could change, the tide, and Captain's sick. Bolin's injured. I want to get this the hell over with.
Sweat pours down my face, stinging my eyes despite the coolness of the water below me. My knees shake as I step one foot in front of the other on the board, which feels almost as solid as the cargo ship's surface. Kelp leaves reach up over the sides of the wood, but I haven't sunk yet. Behind me, Rob is talking incessantly.
Do you think this is like quicksand? Or non-Newtonian fluid?
Same thing, I whisper as a board presses against the back of my shoulder, and I slide it forward into my grip and then lay it down on the bed. I don't know why I'm whispering. I don't know why the fuck I'm walking across the Atlantic either, but here we are. It's darker down here, or maybe that's in my imagination because I'm passing by my first hole. The kelp surrounds it, a twisted wall, feet thick, that gives me a glimpse into the endless depths. My knees shake harder, and the next board creates a series of ripples as I step onto it.
So we should run so we don't sink?
He asks, and I can't bring myself to answer him as I peel my eyes away from the hole and continue to walk forward. I wish my legs would steady. I wish I didn't feel partially paralyzed with fear. I wish I would have stayed on the oil rig. I hear something far to my left, and I settle my gaze on the red reflection in the water from the destroyer lights. There's a splash, and something reflective, like a stripe on coveralls, shimmers for a moment, followed by a large fin that circles and then sinks into a black pocket. My heartbeat is in my throat as I reach behind me, taking another board and lay it down. It's just my imagination.
3 more,
Rob says, and for the first time, I hear his voice shaking.
How are you doing back there,
Ivan and Marco. I supply the names of the steward and the cook, and Rob laughs nervously.
Polo!
I want to laugh too, but it may devolve into hysterics as I lay another board.
We're okay,
Ivan says. Marco's voice is distant, like he's waiting to see if one of us gets sucked under before he'll even consider stepping onto a plank.
I wish I was stoned. Fuck, me too, man. Did you know that you can't smoke weed, even if you're from a state where it's legalized, and keep your certificate?
Rob continues to talk, and I tune him out as my hand finally presses against the destroyer's hull. It's shifted in my mind from something nightmarish to our savior, and I don't even question why the ladder is turned down as I grab it with a grunt and pull myself up. Bolin never would have made it up. Pulling myself to my feet, the clinking of small pieces of metal, of brass, skitters away from my boots as I step onto the deck. My eyes adjust quickly in the red light, and I feel like I'm swallowing sand as I crouch down, picking up a shell casing. I roll the cold cylinder around in my palm as Rob shuffles a foot, sending more scattering.
Don't tell me.
Don't ask, I manage to say, tucking it into my pocket of my coveralls and pulling out my LED flashlight instead. Turning, I flash it at the cargo ship, letting them know we made it across, and after a few seconds, Bolin sends his response. Lowering the beam, my heart gives a hard knock against my ribs as dozens of gold, shining eyes stare at me from the crimson bed. Are we at war in the Atlantic and no one told us? Marco asks as I lower the beam, raising it up again, and the flashing seems duller. It must be the pods attached to the kelp to keep afloat, glinting back at me.
This is a lot of firepower for no bodies.
Ivan pulls out his own light, then shines it up over the superstructure toward where we figured their pilot house would be.
We'll go up. You two take down.
Fear slithers in my gut, slicking my palms again. I want to pull rank, but I don't as I walk through the spent ammo toward the bulkhead door that leads to the second deck. There's fewer casings here, and I grab the big arm of the door, pulling it open. I expected it to hiss like it's decompressing, but it only squeaks as I pull it open and am met with a pleasant surprise. Bright white lights shine up from the steep stairs, and there's no sign of gunfire.
We won the power lotto!
Rob grins despite the stress, creating shadows under his eyes, and suddenly, I appreciate him all the more. He didn't have to be here. He was an ordinary seaman. He was just a kid trying out a career that I was absolutely positive didn't suit him.
Right? We'll go up,
I mock Ivan's voice.
assholes.
The narrow stairs remind me more of a ladder than anything else, and I duck as I step down into the corridor. I wasn't used to ceilings this low, and I glance back at Rob to see his head just clear the top.
What are we looking for down here?
Survivors, my brain answers. People, I say instead. My voice sounds too loud in my ears, and the low vibrational hum of what I assume is some kind of generator is the only other noise, save for our wet boots, squeaking softly as we walk.
What do you think happened?
I'm not thinking about it. I'm trying not to think about the fact that Ahmed didn't touch his food and ended up dead from electrocution after serving on cargo ships for 25 years as the lead engineer. That our captain looked like he was suffering from some kind of radiation sickness. That Bolin had thrown up twice and his nose was bleeding. Or that I had been hit with a wave of dizziness at the same time Bolin had been ill the second time. Were we sick? Were the men on this ship sick and they went crazy from it? And where in the fuck were the bodies?
But you'd call this weird, right? Rob,
I exhale, trying to find my patience. It takes longer than I like as I turn down another corridor.
Yeah, this is weird.
Terrifying. I'm so scared my guts feel paralyzed every time I turn a corner, and I can feel my blood pressure rising in my skull as my anticipation grows.
I talk when I'm scared,
he says quietly, and I stop, tears prickling my eyes for his sake. Christ.
I get it.
Turning another corner, the putrid stench of something rotting hits me like a wall. It isn't the same smell as the charred remains of Ahmed, but it has bile choking my throat as I pull my coveralls up over my face. I breathe shallowly through my teeth as I grab another door handle and push it open, revealing the mess hall. And it was a mess. Rotting food sits on the tables, is scattered across the floor, and is left in the serving trays. There's blood spray here, old enough to look like rust, but some of the food is still moist, sitting in glistening piles like it was chewed, then spit back up recently. Rob steps in beside me, his face taking on a shade of green as he seems to hold his breath.
I'm going to check the freezer,
I tell him, turning to the kitchen. I almost wish for a body, something to show signs of life, to tell a story. Would they look sick? Did something else happen to them? Is all he manages as he nods, and for once, he isn't glued to my hip. My bruised chest aches with the beat of my heart as I step into the kitchen, moving toward the walk-in freezer. The light above is flickering. A bad connection, I tell myself as I grab the door handle and pull it open before I can change my mind. This door hisses. It had a good seal, and I stare unblinking at the contents. The bodies are standing, packed in like sardines, frozen in place with the blood that had pooled at their feet, sticking them to the floor. They aren't sick. My mind celebrates with a touch of relief that doesn't fit the moment, my brain refusing to process this as reality. I can tell their heads are in various states of collapse, brain matter protruding between fractured skull plates, eyes frozen open, if they weren't hanging from their sockets or crushed between their forehead and cheekbone that folded in on itself. Everything slows in my vision as I turn my head to look at the inside of the door. The phrase, "She's calling," is smeared in blood, punctuated by fleshy shrapnel. They weren't put inside like this. They were already in the freezer when they imploded. The floor vibrates under my feet as the lights flicker, and the hull groans around me like it's being crushed. I sway, crashing into a prep table as the freezer door swings shut, and my vision blurs, distorted as it feels like knives are shoved into my ears with a timpani popping crack. I open my mouth to scream, and it's muffled as I projectile vomit. Then the world goes black. The corridor is dark, the flashlight I'm somehow holding bouncing against my thigh as I'm dragged down the hallway backward. I can hear Rob's muffled breathing behind me, his straining grunt that's in time with each tug of my coveralls.
Alejandro, I've got you,
he promises, and though I can't see anything, I feel dread sinking into my bones, the feeling that something is following us, a heavy weight in my mind. I lift my arm slowly, the flashlight impossibly heavy as I shine it down the corridor, and my eyes quiver in my skull as a high-pitched shriek fills the darkened void between us and it. It's too big to fit properly in the corridor. Its black, undulating fins stretched out like sinister wings scraping against the walls as its far too long fingers protrude from double-jointed arms, dig against the floor to pull it along faster. I can hear the sickening slop of wet flesh hitting the floor as it lunges forward a few feet and is forced to reset and then move again. The eyes shine golden in my light, unlidded and staring as its maw spreads wide from tentacles pushing free from the inside, and then it inhales.
Rob, cover your ears!
I yell, and he stops moving, his flashlight swinging around to shine behind him. I can feel the air shaft, the vibration of the subsonic noise reverberating as a low bass in the hull, a groan of metal straining to withstand pressure. My eyes roll back into my head, plunging me into darkness as my body seizes, as my skull feels like it's being crushed between two cargo containers. I feel like I'm floating. I can smell the ocean, hear soft lapping waves. I'm so far beyond pain that nothing hurts anymore, and I smile faintly as I press my face against cool, soft flesh, and my brows furrow. I open my eyes slowly, and all I see is black. It engulfs me like an unending abyss. I lift my arm, my hand meeting a cold, sticky surface, and I push firmly, feeling it stretch.
Alejandro!
Somewhere I hear Rob's sobbing call, and I look up. Red stretches above me like an unending carpet, glowing softly in early morning light. The leaves sway with the current, and so do I, rolling nearly upside down as the casing I'm curled in shifts with the tide. The round hole in the kelp bed lets the first rays of sunlight glitter through the ocean water, and I see him. Not just him, but all of them. Hundreds of sailors, some unmoving, some simply staring unblinkingly as their bodies flop with the motion of the ocean, hanging down from each opening in the kelp like a prized string of pearls. From the deep, the water vibrates. I can feel the sound in my bones now, but it's calming as the creature floats below. An answering call sounds from just above my head, shrill, whining, like the cry of a baby. And then I understand. She's calling. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.